Greetings, and in this short video presentation we're going to see how we go about creating an install of vCenter up inside of a virtual install of Server 2012 using VMware Workstation Pro. This image helps to illustrate how vCenter works as a central control center for all of your ESXi servers. So we can see that the vCenter would be located here. These four objects here represent ESXi servers. On these four servers you would have a number of different virtual machines installed. Now the vCenter allows you to control not only all of these ESXi servers but also the virtual machines that are running on them. And to do this you can also use the Vsphere Client to connect to your vCenter. And this allows you to be outside of, say, the server room. You could be at your Windows 7, 8, or 10 workstation, and using this client, you could connect remotely to the vCenter server, which would allow you to have complete automation, scalability, and the features that the vCenter provides so that you can control everything from one central management interface. We know one of the biggest problems with virtual machines is virtual machine sprawl, and we have to have policies and we have to have procedures in place to control virtual machines so they don't get lost on our network and forgotten about. There's licensing issues, there's resource issues. Let's say we have 1,000 virtual machines. How can we manage those from one single console? And vCenter is the VMware solution. Prior to installing vCenter, there is a lot of prep work that has to be done. This here is the KB article from VMware on how to install vCenter for Windows and what those requirements are. Prior to the installation of vCenter onto your virtual install of Windows Server 2012 or 16, make sure you understand the requirements. First off, you need to synchronize the clocks of all the virtual machines that you planned to install inside of the vCenter server for administration. You also need to verify that the DNS name of the virtual machine that the vCenter is installed on matches the actual full server computer name. Verify that the host name of the virtual machine or the physical server on which you are installing or upgrading vCenter complies with RFC 1123 guidelines. And verify that the system on which you are installing vCenter server is not an Active Directory domain controller. In preparation for the installation of vCenter onto this new virtual install of Server 2012, I want to show you how I went about doing it. First thing I did was I created a virtual install of Server 2012 up inside of VMware Workstation Pro. This is version number 14. But you can also use VMware Player, or you can use VirtualBox. It makes no difference. Now, the next thing I did was I configured the settings for this virtual machine as follows. I went into the processors and I changed it from 1 to 2 because that is another requirement for vCenter to be installed on a install of Server 2012. The next thing I did was I went to the options and I configured shared folders. Now I did this so that I could copy over the installation folder for my vCenter and place that onto this install of Server 2012, because once I install it to the domain, I'm no longer going to be able to see my host machine. So prior to me actually doing the domain add-on portion of this requirement, I went ahead and created a map drive using the shared folders features of VMware Pro. Show you how I did that. I went into the shared folders. I then said I always wanted it enabled, and then I went down here to the add button. I just clicked on this. This brings up the add shared folder wizard. I went next. Now what I can see here is everything that is installed on my host machine. So I browsed on over to my ISO packages. Find those. That's my ISO images. Those are right here. And up inside here, I had a flat for my VMware vCenter. And inside of this folder contains all the downloads that I need to install vCenter. So I went ahead and said OK to that. And what I did next was, I can go ahead and cancel this because I already have the map drive. So what this does is it creates a map drive over to my host machine, which I can see from inside of this virtual install. So if I go over here and I click, and I go to this PC, there is the map drive that I created going over to my VMware folder for vCenter. You can open this up and you'll see that there's all my ISO images, and there's my vCenter. So once that was completed, I went up and I created a folder up inside of the root of my C drive inside of my virtual install for Server 2012. I called it VMware Center vCenter. And I copied the contents of the vCenter from that map drive, which is positioned on my host machine. Now I have everything that I need to perform the install right here inside of my virtual machine for Server 2012. I'm now going to add my new virtual machine for Server 2012 called vCenter to my existing 2012 domain. So I have my root domain controller up, and the name of my domain is cyberoffense.local. I'm now going to find an IP address that I can use to statically configure my vCenter so that it can find the DNS server and the Active Directory services that it needs to be able to join my Server 2012 domain. So one of the requirements for installing vCenter is that you have to have DNS running on your network, because this is how you're going to be able to find all of your ESXi servers, and this is how you're going to be able to locate your vCenter using the client for vCenter. So I'm gone up inside of my DNS server here, and I see all the host records that exist for the different machines that I have created in my domain. What I'm looking for is an IP address that is not in use. So I'm going to go ahead and go through my list of IP addresses that are currently in use, and I see that the IP address that I want to use is .15. So the IP address for my network is 192.168.145. The host IP that I'm going to assign to the vCenter is going to be .15. To make this all work, I'm going to point my default gateway over to my domain controller for my cyberoffense.local domain, and that is .10. So I'm now back over onto my new install of Server 2012 called vCenter. I'm going to right click on my network adapter down here in the lower right corner. I'm going to open my network and sharing center. From here I'm going to go to change adapter settings. I'm going to go to the only network adapter that I have, right click, I'm going to select properties. From here I'm going to go down to IP version 4, double click that, and I'm going to select the radio button for use the following IP address. So let's talk about what I did here. I went up inside of my IP4 properties and I configured this adapter for my vCenter server, which is a virtual install of Server 2012, with the network IP of 192.168.145 using the host IP of 15. I then used the default subnet mask for a Class C network. I went down to the default gateway, and I'm going to point back over to my domain controller. I'm also going to point to my domain controller for the DNS server. So that's all been done. So if this machine needs to find anything and it can't find it locally, I'm saying if you can't find it here, go to the .10 address and look for it there. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Close this. And I can say no to discovery. That's fine. Now we're going to close this. And what we're going to do next here is we're going to actually bring up a command prompt. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a little pinging. So I'm going to type in CMD. And what we're going to do now is we're going to see if we can actually ping the domain controller. So I typed in ping, and I gave it the address for my domain controller, which is 192.168.145.10, and the results came back positive. I can now attempt to join my vCenter 2012 virtual machine to my cyberoffense.local domain. Let's see how we go about doing that. To join this vCenter server to my existing domain, I'm going to have to go up inside the system. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on search, and I'm going to type in just system. Give it a minute. And all I want is just system. So I'm going to click on that. Now I'm going to go over here to change settings. When I'm up inside of here, I'm going to go to the change. And from here, I'm going to give this machine a user-friendly name. And I'm going to change it over to my domain. So I've gone ahead and I've changed the name of the computer to vCenter. I'm now going to go ahead and join the domain. Type in my domain name here. We got a lot going on here, so if you get an error message about the domain controller for the domain could not be located, or DNS could not be found, or whatever the error message may be, just reboot your server, let it settle down and come back up, and then try to join the domain again. So I'm going to go ahead and try to join the domain. And it says the active domain controller for the domain cyberoffense.local could not be contacted. Ensure that the domain name is typed in correctly. I'm going to say OK to that. I'm going to back off the .local. Try it again. And now it pops up and it finds my Active Directory domain controller, and it wants me to log in with my Active Directory administration login username and password. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in. You can see that I'm logging on to the domain CyberOffense, and I'm using my domain credentials for the domain, administrator and my administrator password. I'll go ahead and say OK to that. Now just give it a moment and it should come back and let me know that the machine successfully joined the domain. After just a couple of minutes, the information comes back from my domain letting me know that this machine was successfully joined to the Active Directory database and that DNS did create records for this machine up inside of its DNS database as well. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. I'm going to go and say OK to this. Right after the confirmation message has been displayed and you have configured everything correctly, you can go ahead and close out all the windows and do a restart. We've now rebooted, and I'm now prepared to go ahead and log on to the domain as the administrator on my vCenter server. So I'm going to go ahead and just tell it to log on. It's now going to build my profile for the first time, so this might take a few minutes, so be patient with this technology. So we've joined the machine to the domain. I rebooted, we come back up, we've logged on to vCenter as the administrator for the domain, and we have built our profile. I'm now back to the desktop, and I got a couple more things I got to do. First thing I want to do is make sure that my clocks are synced between this machine and my primary domain controller, or my root domain controller, which is DC1. So I'm going to use the nettime sync command. So I typed in net space time space, this is called a whack whack, if you're, or a backslash backslash, we say whack whack, whack whack DC1 space / set. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to that. It comes up and lets me know that the clock is currently at a certain time. So the local time at DC1 is 9:13, and the local clock on this machine is at 10:13:28. Do I want to match it? I'm going to say yes. Go ahead and hit enter, and it tells me the command completed successfully. Okay, the next thing we want to do is make sure that we have our DNS records created for this machine, that is to say vCenter. So I'm going to go over here to my DC1. I'm going to get inside of my DNS server, and I'm going to check for records. So I've opened up my server manager on my root domain controller DC1. I'm going to go to Tools. From here I'm going to go to DNS. From here I'm going to go to my forward lookup zone, cyberoffense.local. And I don't see, there it is right there. There's my vCenter. Now I got to make sure that I got a reverse lookup record for this guy. Right? So I'm going to go over here, look at my reverse lookup zone, and do I see it? Yes, there it is right there. So I've got all the records I need. I've got these two machines synced up. Everything's looking good. Alright, so in part 2, we're going to get into the actual install of a vCenter. You got to see in part 1 that there's a lot more to installing vCenter than just slapping in the DVD and going to town. Right? There's a lot of prep work. Alright, I'll see you in part 2.